NDPA presents the Water Safety Champion Podcast.
And welcome back to another episode of the NDPA Water Safety Champion Podcast. I'm Katchmarchi, the Executive Director of the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. And joining me today, the other half of the Water Safety Odd Couple, Alissa Magrum. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, thank you. It's good to be here again.
I just had Alan Corn on as a guest not too recently, so I love this. You know, one day we are going to get the full Water Safety Odd Couple to join a Water Safety Champions podcast. I think it'd be a fun.
It would be fun. It would need to be a lot longer than 45 minutes, I think, because the three of us just alone could fill up that space. I know Alan and I struggle every time we do an odd couple with keeping it in some sort of time box.
Absolutely. Well, let's get right into today's guest. This is a guest Alissa and I are both familiar with. I know many people in the water safety community are also familiar with. Jonathan St. Clair, the co-founder of the Jasper Ray Foundation. Welcome to the podcast, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And Jonathan, we'll get right into the discussion. Same question we ask all our guests at the beginning of the podcast. What is your water story?
Well, you know, my water story started at a very young age. Grew up in the Northwest and had a lot of outdoor water activities. And specifically, as a young child, we started water skiing was probably the first thing I can remember, you know, kind of diving into as far as an action sport. And my first introduction into life vests, actually, I can remember as a kid, you know, sitting on the back boat trying to get my life vest on and figure it out. And back in those days, there weren't as many different sizes, nor were they as you know, good of a life vest as what we have available now. But I can remember being able to, you know, finally get my life vest on and hop in the water, and it would bunch up over my neck, and you know, not going to be really all that comfortable until you got pulled out of the water and get going. And then the advent of the wakeboard. When I was a kid, actually, the Skirfer was first. I think I want to say that was probably in the middle of the 80s or so.
What was it? What did you say? The Skirfer? What is
Skirfer,
that?
prelude to the wakeboard, and it basically was just a small surfboard, and they had put straps on it, and like foot straps to try to basically create like this fun toy. And then, I'd say probably about 86, 87, they came out, Hyperlight came out with the first wakeboard. And that was like the new cool thing to do. And I can remember, you know, I was about 12 or 13 years old at that time. And all our friends, you know, we all had boats and stuff. And that was like the coolest thing in the whole world to be, you know, like stepping into a new thing that hadn't been introduced yet. So, I mean, growing up as kids, I mean, we'd be out on the water from sun up till sundown, you know, doing that and inner tubing and all kinds of things. And I would say, you know, that was probably my introduction to the fun side of water sports. As far as like learning to swim, I can recall in our town, which was pretty small, we had the Lions Club, believe it or not, had an indoor pool with a high dive and two low, like, I don't know what they would be, like 6-foot diving boards, I guess.
1 meter.
What's that?
Probably 1 meter, because the 3 meters is the high dive.
Yeah. And it was a heated indoor pool, and we grew up in the Northwest, so I mean, it was open year round. And I can remember my mom, you know, taking stuff and starting swim lessons, which was probably, I would say I was around 4 or 5. And I think that was rather common in those days. Most kids, unless you had a swimming pool, didn't really learn to swim until they were probably kindergarten age. So parents could take them to the pool and drop them off, you know, for a few hours while they're running errands and that type of thing. But yeah, I think things are a lot different now.
So, you know, Jonathan, I know you and your wife, Julie, are very, very involved in water safety, you know, both at the local level and, you know, you're both working, in a way at the national level. And can you share a little bit about Jasper's story and what got you guys involved in water safety? Because we know you lost your son Jasper to a drowning, but it's so rare, with the number of families that we see getting involved in this space, that families choose to get involved in the advocacy and prevention work. And you and Julie have just been amazing champions over the years at making sure other families are aware of this information.
Well, I think to start out, Jasper was 21 months old. It was March 19th, 2014. And my wife and I had gotten up that morning and, kissed him goodbye and said, we'll see you when I get home tonight. And off to work I went. And Julie had started about the same time. On 9 o'clock, had dropped, our 19-year-old babysitter who lived beside us, watched him one day a week and came over to watch him for the day while Julie went off to work. And at about 10:15, Julie got a call from her that she had found in her pool. And in addition, they were taking him, he was in the ambulance going to Chalk, which is the Children's Hospital of Orange County here. And Julie immediately called me right after that phone call and, in hysteria, telling me that, they had found Jasper in the pool. And my recollection was I couldn't remember what pool that would even be because we don't have a pool. Mm-hmm. And it had been very, very hot that day, even for March that previous weekend. And we actually had our little kiddie inflatable pool up that he was playing in. And I was thinking, there's no way I left that sitting there. I know I had turned it over and dumped out the water. And she said, no, she said they found him in their pool. And I was like, oh God. And I remember thinking to myself, how in the world did he get over there? Because, she was specifically told not to take him over there because we knew that there was an unfenced pool and that, what could possibly happen did happen. So she evidently went to the restroom for a few minutes and left him alone playing in the living room. And he got up and walked through an open door in the master bedroom, which led out to the backyard pool. And we assumed that he was probably trying to get one of the pool toys out of the pool and fell in fully clothed. And of course, he did not know how to swim at that age. He was actually just about ready to start swim lessons, which we thought was early for us, but he was going to be starting in about a month. And evidently, she walked out. The first thing she did was not check the water. She's running around the house, checking everywhere else. And she walked out into the backyard and saw him in the pool and immediately started screaming. And her grandfather, who lived next door, was an ex-fireman and came out and drug him out of the pool. And they started CPR and, of course, called 911. And it only took a couple of minutes for the paramedics to get there because we're not too far from the fire station. And they rushed him to Chalk. But the total amount of time down was around 50 minutes, which is an extremely long period of time. They tried to get him back at the hospital. And by the time I had gotten the call and gotten to the hospital, which was only about 10 minutes from my office, I remember coming into the ER. And at that moment, they had just brought him back within 15 to 20 seconds before I walked in. So I knew that the prognosis was probably not going to be very good just because of the amount of time that he was under. But at that particular point, we were pretty hopeful that he was going to be okay. We're sitting there praying that, it wasn't too long and so forth. And it turned out, as time went on that day, they came in and gave us all the results and told us they were going to have to do MRIs to be able to figure out what exactly they're going to be able to find out for sure. But their overall prognosis was that it was going to be pretty bad just because of the amount of time he was without oxygen. So for us, we couldn't believe what happened. We were sitting in the hospital there, and from our hospital window, we could actually see our house, which was only about 1.5 miles away. And I remember both of us just sitting there thinking, how in the world could this have happened? We took every parenting class there possibly was. We tried, basically anything that popped up. We read if there was anything else, including water safety. And evidently it clearly wasn't enough, because I think had we had more conversations with our babysitter, we would probably have been able to instill and impress on her that it was just not a safe place for her to take him. And, that isn't what happened. So as we were sitting in the hospital, we decided, you know what, there is no way we're going to continue doing, we have no idea what's going to happen at that point, whether or not he was going to live or die. But one thing we knew is that we were definitely going to try to figure out something to help out in this, arena of drowning prevention. And I thought one thing that we were very mistaken on was I remember verbally talking about it in the hospital that, this can't be that big of a problem to solve. If, this happens quite a bit, we're looking up statistics, and you know what, we'll just jump right in. We're two parents that are type A personalities. We can solve this problem. And that was about the farthest thing from reality. After everything after Jasper passed, and as a month or two went by, and we started, looking into setting up a 501c3 foundation and getting a foundation up and running, we realized that there not only how many drownings there were, but how many people are already in this arena working on water safety. And I think what staggered us the most was how in the world are there so many people out there working in water safety, and we didn't know anything more than what, basically making sure that locked the toilet seats and, all that, bathtub and all those kind of things. But there are so many more aspects to drowning prevention that we didn't know, that really we thought we should. And we do live in an urban area with plenty of pools. So I think, that was for us the beginning of what has been a 9-year road to helping prevent, or helping to make the attempt to prevent drownings throughout our country.
Well, I just want to say, Jonathan, I think I met you and Julie pretty soon after you came into this space, and just a thank you for your courage to be in this space. I think this is, of the podcasts that we've done, I think this is the first one that we've done with a parent. And I know for me, my journey in water safety has been alongside so many of the parents in the Families United to Prevent Drowning space, and the courage that you guys have to share your story and Jasper's story and be in this space to keep doing the work to make change is just huge. And I just want to say thank you for all of the people that can't be in the space, because you and I have had conversations around, not everybody can be in this space. Not every parent or not every family member who's been impacted can be in the space. So I want to honor that for a second. And then, and it's been a huge honor to watch you both in this space and what you are doing now, and having been in here for a number of years versus when you first came in, and what you're doing in California and what you're doing beyond. So, I want to take the time to say that to you while we're staring at each other, but this will be an audio thing. But it's, you both are amazing in what you've been doing and continue to do in Jasper's honor and celebration of his life.
Well, thank you. I feel fairly honored in so many ways just to be part of a group that are just like us. Mm-hmm. Throughout, with the group of Families United, it's been really great to be able to have a support group of a very specific group of how we deal with drowning in general. Because one thing, we went to a support group meeting, just a general support group meeting, and I felt extremely out of place right after that initially happened, because so many of the other parents were people that had lost a child to a drunk driver, or to a drug overdose, or to a suicide, or to a cancer, to leukemia, to any other form of a child drowning. And I remember thinking, this is not really going to help me. And shortly thereafter, someone in the drowning prevention community contacted us, and we all got together with the Orange County Fire Authority PIO person, and started talking about, what we can do. And I think for both Julie and I, my wife, it was an avenue that we could easily relate to. But immediately when we kind of jumped in and started being around everyone else that had gone through this already previous to us, it was a huge relief to know that we weren't the only ones that had the loss of a child through a drowning. And what was even more interesting is to find out how many different ways within that space children can drown. There isn't just one. I think that's where the door really flew open, and we were like, oh my God, there is so many ways that children can drown that are different. And how are we not hearing about this on more of a public platform? And I think for both of us, it was just a real eye-opening experience to feel like, we have to do something. We are the people that can do something. And the sad thing was we were childless at that point. We didn't have another child. He was our only child at that point. And I think the anger and frustration side of our grief cycle popped out, and probably worked to our benefit at that point, with being able to find an avenue to help release some stress of trying to figure out what we can do to make this better. And it has been a very interesting road, but I have been very thankful to have all of the people that we've come in contact, from the lifeguard associations to the fire department chiefs all over the country, and through all of the people within the National Drowning Prevention Alliance and the United Families United group. And I mean, it's been a really huge blessing for us to be able to have this forum, for us to be able to talk about it and really inspire moving forward and make some change, which I think I have seen a lot of change in the last 9 years since we started this. And I feel really confident about where we're going as a country moving forward with drowning prevention. And hopefully there is more talk publicly about it. I think that's probably the biggest issue that we're running into, is that people just don't want to talk about it. So,
Jonathan, one of the things, and I have this come up all the time when I talk to people about water safety, and it's something, quite frankly, we as NDPA put into our messaging, is there's no one single way. As you have already brought up, kids are drowning in so many different ways that there's no one solid single way, where I can't just make this one recommendation to parents and say, if you do X, your child will not drown, right? And I think that makes it hard from a communication standpoint, because we as humans, frankly, don't like challenging things, and drowning is challenging.
It's complex and challenging.
Yeah. And
yeah.
And and that's, I think, something that we are getting better at, not just NDPA, but the whole cause of messaging out. Look, there's not one single solution, but there are preventable steps a family can take to make sure they're safer around water. But the reality is there's no way to create a safe environment around water. And to me, I think that creates that added challenge of pushing that message out. And I think the other challenge is, and Alissa, you and I have talked about this on the podcast already, is drowning is a multi-sector problem, where We have, Jonathan, you mentioned the firefighters, the paramedics, the pediatricians are included in this, lifeguards, aquatic facility, public health, like
caregivers, babysitters, nannies, like that. There's
and being able to get the correct message out to everyone, but structure this in a way where it's easily understandable, quick. I guess my point here is we are getting better at advancing that. But I have to give my own separate thanks than Alissa gave, because Alissa and I have said this a lot over the years, is we can go and talk about water safety all day long. I can give a 4 or 5 hour lecture on water safety, but I may not convince anyone in the room that this is going to happen to them, because what we find with drowning, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Jonathan, is it's not going to happen to me attitude.
It's a them thing, not a me thing for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I always thank the folks like you and Julie in our Families United group, and really any family that's willing to stand up and talk about this, who has experienced a fatal drowning, because the reality is, you can turn to a parent and say, look, I don't want the same thing that happened to me to happen to you. And that is such a powerful thing. And I think that too, has advanced drowning prevention in a way where I don't think those of us who are just advocates and experts in the space could do. And I think that true partnership with a lot of the family foundations, including yours and Julie's, has really helped elevate this message nationwide.
I agree.
Well, thank you. I think I wish more parents would be able to step up and talk about it. I think more of us can make that bigger difference, right? Quicker. One thing I can easily attest to also is that I think the reason that so many people don't want to talk about drowning prevention at all is the same reason that any parent that's lost a child to a drowning, is that they are having to look at a mirror in some ways, where they're staring down the worst possible thing that either could happen or did happen. For the parents that lost a child, oftentimes, in our years of experience in this, that it's usually either a grandparent or parent most of the time that's watching the child, and therefore there's an enormous amount of guilt that happens, which really shouldn't be there, because there isn't a single parent that I have met in all these years that has ever said anything other than, I wish I would have known more about this. Because when you ask a parent, how, what do you have a swimming pool? Yes, we have a swimming pool. And well, do you have a fence around your pool? And oftentimes the answer is no, but we watch our kids all the time. And that answer is probably the most scary for us, because that is physically impossible. And I know my experience, without even having a pool, that there have been several circumstances where I have been scared to death that I walked away for 3 seconds, 3 feet around the corner in the hall to change laundry in the laundry room, while a child is in the swimming or in the bathtub. And for just a millisecond, there's no noise. And you think, oh my gosh, I literally just went to push the start button. And you come back in, and of course, everything's fine. But that millisecond of a gut drop that you feel is exactly how, when you talk to a parent who has not lost a child to a drowning, in that blink of a moment, they almost
get it
and don't want to hear anything else about what we have to say.
It's so interestingly, in one of the podcasts we recorded earlier, we were talking a lot about where shame and blame and guilt play into preventable things. And I'm a big Brene Brown supporter, and she's, I don't know if you know who she is, but she has this whole thing around shame and blame. And I have wanted to have a conversation with her because of exactly what you're talking about, is how do we get people to listen, and how do we turn off that thing that seems to happen with people when they don't want to look at it, like, oh, I'm a good parent, or oh, I watch and that whole thing that people do like that is a blockade to them getting this message. And in a way it's, I mean, I think that's what you're saying. And people think that they're not, this is not going to be their reality. And yeah, gosh, it's so complicated. People are complicated and people are also human.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just the reality of it, is that we are all human. We as parents absolutely try to do every single thing you can to make sure each child is safe. And it's really interesting to me when we run into these roadblocks, so to speak, where, I mean, like I said, there isn't a single parent I've talked to that's lost a child that doesn't go back and think about what we could have done differently. I mean, Julie and I for years have gone back and said, we should have told her, we should have been more emphatic. We should have had different conversations with the parents. We should have had, everything was a we should have, and we should have known. But the reality is that there isn't a single parent that's going to know everything about how to raise a child, especially the first one. I think you're so enamored with just, this beautiful little life that came into the world that all you're doing is try to do it right. And, you always hear the adage, from a parent who's had 4 children, they're terrified, hovering over the first one, but by the 4th one, they're giving them knives to play with. It's kind of not quite that, obviously not that reality, but the thing is that you kind of settle in, and you become a better parent, with each child. And it's such a misconception that this can't happen to you. And, or worse, it happens to other people until you're the other person.
Yeah.
I feel like, when I talk to other parents who've lost a child that, to whichever type of drowning circumstance happened, when it's one parent to another, the love that, the loss of the love that happened that day, that no matter what they did wrong, and I mean wrong by the choice we made to do something different that minute, there's no question there was intent. I mean, there just isn't. Parents are not like that. There is no way that anyone obviously would want their child to drown, but I think we're not hit with enough information to make it repetitive. And I know growing up when I was a kid, there wasn't a single pool that had a fence around it. I had a friend with an indoor pool, and all of the bedrooms were around the pool with a sliding glass door that walked out to an open pool. And I'm thinking, I use this analogy when I'm talking to people sometimes, that I just cannot possibly imagine in today's world that would ever happen. But it does. I mean, it actually does. I had a friend of ours, after Jasper had drowned, that bought a home here in Newport Beach area that had an indoor pool that they had to remodel, and they were going to be having a newborn in like 4 months. And I thought to myself, please tell me that you are going to upgrade this pool, because I mean, that's even worse than having one in the backyard, frankly, because it's just inside the house. And I remember having extensive conversations with the father about, like, how, because I remember him asking, what do I need to do to make my pool safe? And I was like, there is no safe. There is only safe. Because you have a pool inside your house, it's going to be difficult to keep that pool very safe. And so, of course, we went down the laundry list of actual safety devices, in addition, swim lessons at birth, basically. But it's really interesting to see how we as parents, change mindset. But, in our world recently, it feels like we keep, year over year, we're making more headway with, more more information getting to younger children at a younger age, which I think, in our opinion, is probably going to be the fastest and easiest way to change the overall cultural aspect of drowning itself. I think the misconception, we always hear this, that drowning is silent, and it is silent. Most of the time, drowning victims aren't making noises. They're not splashing. They're not. And the reality is, when you're around, like, let's say you're just in your home and the door is left open and they're going out, you live on a lake or a river, and they're gone for 1 minute, that's more than enough time for them to get to an open water source and fall in. And it's, of course, Memorial Day weekend just happened, and all I've seen come through my email and news feeds are the drownings that have happened around this country in so many different ways. And a lot of them specifically are open water. Yeah. And you hear about it and most of it is either they weren't wearing a life jacket, or their parents, one case was the parents were putting everything back in the car and they were leaving.
Non-swim time. Yep.
Turn around and we're talking about seconds. It wasn't. And once again, they're not doing anything other than just being a parent. But I think that if we can, as a collective group, put drowning prevention to the front of the line of things that we need to do to protect our children, and kind of change that cultural stigma almost that happens with drowning itself. It's almost like, I remember 9 years ago, people were bad parents if they had a child that had drowned. It was like, no wonder we have a problem with nobody wanting to speak out about this. They're basically shunned and tossed aside and cast out as horrible parents because, their child drowned under their care. But the reality was that I don't know a single parent in my lifetime that hasn't had what I would call a close call with a drowning. And I'm like, theirs just went that extra 5 seconds that everyone else's didn't. And I have to make a massive effort to change that mindset.
It's interesting because in this space, as Adam and I are advocates in this space, and I think we both, at least I know I can speak for myself, have become huge protectors of the you in the equation, because I know I represented, the Holst family and Collins family for 13 years, and how many times I had conversations where people would say something and I would defend. I would literally bow up like a mama bear and be like, you absolutely there is no space in this for blame or whatever, and bring it back to exactly what you're saying is I as a parent, have had a close call around water with my child who's now 18. And that was like, this is real and people need to go ahead, Adam.
Well, I think, one of the challenging things, a parent doesn't know what they don't know. Right. And I think that's often the challenge with drowning is, we've tried to been working with pediatricians, right, to try and get them to talk more about childhood drowning risks. And my God, drowning is the single leading cause of death for children ages 1 to 4 now. And we still can't get some pediatricians to talk about it.
Right, better be on top of their list.
Yeah, and it's not that they don't want to or they don't care. It's just they have so much they need to get through in a defined period of time. And water safety is not easy. It's likely to lead to 15 questions about swim lessons and proper barriers and everything else, right? But, I think that's the thing, we always say that I didn't know factor is, and one of the ones we hit on is 70% of these childhood drownings are happening during non-swim times. And, Jonathan, that was Jasper's story right there. He was not expected to be in or around the water, and it's an attractive nuisance. And this sounds a little bit crude, but this is what our chief medical advisor, Dr. Julie Gilchrist, just admits is like, hey, even if you're a parent that you say you watch your kid all the time, well, when do you go to pee then? Or when do you go to shower?
That's the human factor, for real.
Yeah. But Jonathan, with a little bit of time we have left, tell us a little bit about the Jasper Ray Foundation. What are your activities and what are you guys trying to accomplish?
Well, since Jasper was only 21 months old, and what we found out rather quickly in our world was that we as, young parents and parents with young children did not get the information we needed. I really feel like we would have probably paid attention to information that was given to us about, the specifics of drowning. And so our organization was started with the intent to help children and advocate for children ages 0 to 5. We really quickly realized that, it was the number one killer for children ages under 5. And we're not in a unrealistic world thinking that we're going to make that number 0. But I think that our goal is, year over year to see the number decline. And believe me, we are not the only people in this space. We have been able to, partner up with numerous other foundations that are all doing the same thing. And really, one thing I've been very thankful for is that none of us in this space have been so guarded with our materials and our story and everything else that we're not willing to share that with someone else. Because I think for us, it's, trying to create new content and especially a lot of it's trial and error. Some of the things that we've done worked and some haven't. We are, throughout the course of the last 9 years, one major part of what we've worked on is some legislation here in the state of California, which was getting a 2-barrier law, which we were able to get, to help and participate in 2017. And that law took effect in January 2018. And I know that both Florida and Texas have been working on the same thing. And we're hoping, obviously, that throughout the next decade or so, it would be great if we can get the majority of our states to sign on to a similar type plan. We do believe for sure that, it's not the only way you're going to keep your child safe is, preventing them to fall into the pool with 2 barriers, but it is a really good start. And I think, if we can continue going, along with that and, changing the mindset of everybody that it's okay to see a pool fence in your backyard. And, I know it may not be the most beautiful thing to look at, but I'll tell you the least beautiful thing is a child floating in your pool. So I know that for us, that's one big aspect of what we've been working towards is not just legislation itself, but the awareness of, being able to put these barriers up in your backyard, because they are statistically, without a question, they do reduce your percentage of a possible drowning. The second part is swim lessons. I think the biggest thing that we advocate for with almost every single parent that we see with a young child, and usually I ask is, are your kids in swim lessons? And oftentimes they say no. And it's an easy follow-up question with, why not? Or a variation of that anyway. But I think that, a lot of times when that question is posed to a parent that doesn't have their kids in swim lessons, their response back most of the time is, I didn't know that I could put my kids in swim lessons at 2 or 6 months or and I think that was even our misconception. I had, my thought was if we put them in by 2, we're ahead of the game. In reality, that's not the case. And I actually had the affirmation just last night. Our daughter, who started in swim lessons 6 months and is now almost 7.5, went to try out for a swim team along with her friend who's been swimming for quite a while. And both of them jumped in the pool. And before they had even finished, they were required to do the 4 strokes and in a certain period of time and things. But before they even made the first leg of the first lap, the person that was standing there told Julie that she's like, they've been swimming for a while, huh? And Julie said, yeah. And I don't think they knew the whole story or anything, but by the time they were done, the instructor or coach, they got out of the pool and they were like, oh, they're, I don't remember the whole conversation, but the fact was that they were more than skilled enough to join the swim team at the level they were trying for. In fact, they were talking to them about joining the higher level because their skills were so good. And the only way that happened was that our children were in the swimming pool at a very, very, very young age. And one thing that we learned and have continued to learn, which is really easy to tell other parents, is your child will not be scared of the water if they're in the water early. They'll learn to respect the water, but they won't be terrified of it when they're jumping in. You know, you take a 5-year-old that hasn't been in the water at all and expect them to jump in and, you know, swim. There are immediate fears that come up for that child. And I guess that's probably one of the biggest things for us is, you know, to get parents to acknowledge in that space that they can, that it's okay to get my kids into swim lessons. And when you start talking about the statistics of the advantages of swim lessons early, it's not a very hard conversation. And then at some point, usually it does come out that we lost our child. And then all of a sudden the look on that parent's face changes, and the conversation took a real nice turn for the most part, where instead of me just being a parent telling another parent, it's not just a parent, but an advocate, but someone else who lost a child to it, that their reality of why they need to put their child in swim lessons came full circle in a matter of 2 minutes. And it's really neat to watch them physically turn around from a conversation at that point, walk over and sign up for swim lessons. And it's just, it's neat to see that, you know, transpire in such a way.
Well, and I know I know of an example of something that you guys have just done, that is sort of walking the talk around the earlier information. Is I know that you're supporting some of the work that our friend Kim Schultz with Face and Water Swim Kim is doing around creating materials for parents around getting babies acclimated to water in the bathtub and things like that. And so I do think that those pieces that you guys are doing through the Jasper Ray Foundation are going to save lives and reach people where they need to be reached. It's really been amazing watching you guys from a little bit from afar on the journey.
You know, and one thing I have to toss out there, you know, and just because, you know, of course I represent the NDPA and we're all about collaboration in this space. And I think, you know, Jonathan, what you and Julie have done with the Jasper Ray Foundation is a perfect example of how, not just at the national level, but at the local level, that alliance is critical, right? You know, you guys have partnered with swim schools, you have partnered with, you know, pediatrician groups, fire departments. Like, you guys are actually in the community making those connections. And, you know, you're in Orange County, California, which is a hugely populated, I don't know if there are any empty open fields left in Orange County, but, you know, to see those connections, I mean, that's really what needs to happen at the local level to really make that impact, because it does take all of us, and you've already said it, hitting parents with this message time and time again, and almost like at every angle a parent turns to, whether they're, you know, talking to their firefighter or paramedic at their child's school, or whether they're, you know, it's a public health PSA, or whether they're in their pediatrician's office, or whether they're signing their kids up for swim lessons, they're getting hit with that importance of water safety and the steps they can take to make their family safer. Just for time purposes, because I know we are
Ask him the question. Ask him the question.
I'm gonna ask Jonathan our ever famous question on the Water Safety Champion podcast, which is, Jonathan, I am handing you a water safety magic wand. You can change one thing, big or small. What would you change in water safety?
I think I briefly said something about it earlier, but I think the one thing that would make this such a much easier avenue to pave the way that we can get the information out is to change the stigma of drowning itself. If we could change the way that we as a society view drowning as a whole across the board on any level, when you talk to somebody about drowning, I would love to see us have a conversation with somebody and not have there be the immediate defense mechanism that comes up. I have a small anecdote about this, and it will more or less tie this together of why I feel like this is probably the biggest thing that would make it easier for us to prevent drowning. 4 weeks ago at a water safety event, Julie was talking to a group of parents, and they were coming up to the booth and talking about, all the different things. And this woman walked by, and then she came back and turned around 10 minutes later and walked by again. And there didn't happen to be anybody at the booth at that moment. And so Julie stepped out and stopped her and asked her a question of, I noticed you've come by a couple of times. Did you have any questions or anything? And the woman said no. And Julie said, well, do you have a pool? And she said yes. But she was rather hesitant to say yes. And then immediately, the second question is, do you have a fence around your pool? And she said her response, which is what scares me the most and why I feel like we've got to change this narrative of drowning, is she said no. And Julie said, why don't you have one? And she said, because we don't have to. And I thought, wow. And Julie asked her again, and she said, yeah, we bought a house that's old enough that we didn't have to put a pool or a fence around the pool. And I thought, wow. And she's holding her 2-year-old, holding her in her hands, in her arms. And I'm thinking to myself, as Julie's telling me this interaction she had, and I'm sitting here thinking, this is the problem. This is the whole problem right there. And she was immediately on the defense about, and when the conversation was happening, she had to be thinking as she's standing there staring at a banner of the loss of our child and the story that's right in front of her, and to not recognize that happened to someone that she now knows, that she's spoken with. And I felt like she walked away that day and didn't get the message. And I thought, but her, as angry as I was about that whole interaction, I realized later in the afternoon that day that is what happens across this country as a whole. We as people have not made this accessible enough and made it so that it's not such a negative and non-issue for most people, which God forbid, I hope it's not for most people, but it does happen. And it is now the number one killer for children under 5. So until we start recognizing how we can change that perception of drowning and what we're going to do about it, we are not going to change the outcome down the road either. So my answer is emphatically, the information needs to be brought to people in a way so that it doesn't make them feel shamed. And so I hope that we're able to get there sooner than later.
Yeah. Well, wow. To me, that just goes to show how important the way that we message this.
Yeah, I was about to say that it's the what is the information, and then it's how are we putting the message out so we can reach people and not shut them down, and so that they can be open to hearing it. And we're figuring it out. I think we're getting,
I get that question all the time. I mean, we put a lot of time and effort into our messaging, and, and not just the crafting of the message and the words, but how it's presented, the visuals that go along with it, all of that. And, people ask, is it really that hard where you need to invest that kind of time? And the reality is, yeah, it is.
Yes.
If you want it to be effective and reach, you really do have to think about those things. Well, Jonathan, Alissa, I know we could probably carry on this discussion for so long. And Jonathan, just as friend to friend, thank you so much for your willingness to always share Jasper's story and the work that you and Julie do. It is truly saving lives. And that is one thing we often remind ourselves is it's really hard this time of year because we hear a lot of the tragedies. but we have no idea how many families we're actually impacting and keeping their children safe. So thank you for all the work that you do. Alissa, my friend, thank you as always for being a co-host on the Water Safety Champion podcast and for all the work that you do. And to everyone listening, tune in for our next episode that will be dropping here shortly. Stay safe this summer, and we'll see you on the next episode of the NDPA Water Safety Champion podcast.
Thank you both.
Thank you.